All right, good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We have a great lineup of panelists for today's discussion. My name is Leanne, and I'm the graphic designer of IAB Canada, and today's discussion is Creativity at the Forefront of Data-Driven Campaigns, presented by Vistar Media. Given the rise of ad tech in the out-of-home space, marketers now have the opportunity to utilize the advanced capabilities of digital out-of-home, including automation, data and measurement, and deploy data-driven campaigns while leveraging an engaging and personalized dynamic creatives. Today's panel of industry experts will demonstrate that out-of-home doesn't have to be boring and speak to the unique capabilities of digital out-of-home and best practices for dynamic creative. First, we'd like to thank our elite corporate sponsors, Amazon Ads, Google, Samsung Ads, the Globe and Mail, and lastly, the Trade Desk. We welcome you to post your questions in the Q&A section of Zoom at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So without further delay, please welcome our moderator, Scott Mitchell, Managing Director, Vistar Media Canada, and our panelists, Julie Evans, VP Media Director, McCann West, Brian Allen, Executive Creative Director, McCann West, and Jessica Littlejohn, Director of Digital Innovations at Pattison Outdoors. Take it away.
Great, thank you. And yes, everyone, I'm Scott Mitchell, Managing Director for Vistar Media Canada. We're a leading global provider of software for the digital out-of-home space. Thank you very much for joining us today. And our panel discussions are about best practices and considerations for digital out-of-home and specifically dynamic creative. With me today, as we were just introduced, but another quick round just to get everyone going, is Julie Evans, the Vice President of Media for McCann West. We have Jessica Littlejohn, who's the Director, Digital Innovation at Pattison Outdoor. And we have Brian Allen, the Executive Creative Director at McCann West. Welcome, guys, and super excited. So to kick it off, really the center of what we're talking about today is we've seen a rise of ad tech in the digital out-of-home space. We can kind of think of the first iteration of this space as programmatic digital out-of-home 1.0. And if you can say that 10 times, we'll buy you a coffee. But I think the exciting thing is the 2.0 version of that today, which is we've kind of really done a great job at talking about automation. We've done a great job at talking about the benefits that data has been brought into the digital out-of-home space and being able to execute that in similar fashions to how you would in the online space, and as well as measurement is proving these investments. The second phase, which I think what we're starting to see further adoption, is the creative aspect. And it's being able to not only deliver that ad at the right time, in the right place, but we're able to add a personalization to it. And so this panel, we're really going to dive into that. And so I think really to kick it off, I'd love to turn to Julie and really ask a question. And in your opinion, how is out of home, or more adequately put, digital out of home evolved in the recent years? And maybe kind of share some of your thoughts about what you've seen from the start to kind of where we are today.
For sure. And it's been a really exciting journey, I think, to watch, especially in the past few years. When digital out of home was first introduced, I don't know, Jessica, maybe 10 years ago, maybe even more. One of our key clients is the lotteries. So digital out of home right at that time was a game changer because it allowed us to have that dynamic link and display the jackpot in real time. That was groundbreaking. Now we fast forward, and exactly what you said, that beyond just having the right message, it really forces us in a good way to flex that creative muscle and think about, who are we targeting? When are we targeting? Why are we targeting? And to blend that together. And that's, I think, really the exciting part of programmatic out of home, that it's not just saying, this is the board, this is what your message has to be, but really forcing us to think about that audience mindset when they're going to see the board, and to work with people like Brian to think about how, you bring it to life in a really contextually relevant way.
Yeah, great point. And obviously you're fielding a lot of, or working really closely with the brands and the clients directly on kind of educating them on those advancements. On the other side, Jess, well, from your perspective, how are you seeing that?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think some of the exciting pieces, mine are a little less sexy sometimes, I think, because I always think about efficiency, particularly going with the lottery model. I've worked with lottery clients for a long time. When you look at how much effort would go into posting or posting instructions, getting creative out, the idea of being able to hit your right audience, change your creative quickly, really creates efficiency from a buying standpoint and an execution standpoint, and definitely makes things a lot easier while still working with the environments we have on the out-of-home side, as well as hitting your audience factors as well.
Brian, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really exciting time. I think, I did sort of a survey of the compelling work that's been done with digital out of home, and it's actually few and far between, even though it's been around for so long. But I think, with the, now that it's becoming easier, I think, 10 years ago, it was still complex. There was kinks to work out. But I think with the tech that's starting to come into play now, it'll become more viable for brands and advertisers to start to use this and do really compelling things. So I think it's an exciting time for out of home in general with this stuff.
Yeah, so we think we're excited about the new ways that the technology's kind of enabled all sides of our discussions. Have these opened up new opportunities then for the creative process, Brian, on your end? And then Jess, you mentioned a little bit about efficiencies there as well. Do you see that as kind of a net new opportunity to engage different clients maybe, or open up new discussions?
I can go first. I think.
Yeah, I was deferring to the creative mind of.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, just to jump in there. I think the thing that I've noticed, the opportunity that's sort of opened up is that we can start to look at out of home as a full funnel medium. It was really purely, well, almost always awareness, just because it's it's kind of far away and you're driving by at 70 kilometers an hour sort of thing. And then you have some of the other mediums like transit shelters, but because of things like office, the office opportunities with the elevator screens, you can kind of start to see a full funnel thing, especially with transit at home outside of stores. It's interesting to start to think about it in that way, which makes it incredibly complex as well. Like it used to be we just put up the most cut down version of the ad on the out of home and used it as a support mechanism. But I think there's more opportunity to use it along a customer journey, which is different than the way we've been thinking about out of home. Does that track, Jessica?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
I love that you brought up sort of the place-based spaces, offices, some of our indoor spaces, because it does allow for crossover with video, which often when you think about home, big splashy billboards, JPEGs, one message. And I think all of those rules still apply. You're the creative mind on this, but out of home does bright, bold, concise messaging well. But once you can start to layer in some of those aspects of video and having creative formats cross over between mediums makes it even easier, staying on that efficiency note. So if you're working on a reel that fits really nicely on a 4x6 panel without sound that accepts video, and you can start to see it sort of cross-platform and targeting into spaces as they are on that customer journey, which is always exciting.
And I feel like, even just, sorry to add in, like if we're honest, like some of the best creative executions really can come from out of home. It's just so, especially when we think about it from a digital programmatic standpoint, it's just taking that a step further. And instead of saying, okay, what is legible or what do we have to work with, of really kind of taking the lead and saying, I am my audience, I am in an elevator, I am at the mall, I am waiting for a bus, and really trying to think of like, what's a fun way to get their attention in that moment. And it doesn't always even have to be the exact same message, which is, again, the brilliance of thinking about it more programmatically. So I think that's a fun part.
Totally. And you make a great point there as well. I think sometimes different channels get so boxed into offering a very specific fix for a part of their marketing efforts. And out of home, generally speaking, is amazing at so many different things. We've seen adoption from direct DR clients that are coming into the out of home space to really work on understanding that upper funnel awareness piece that could drive for reaching those DR perspectives. And again, the messaging back to clients is, that ability to customize it or to have flexibility to make it much more maybe relevant for what goals they're trying to achieve. And I think that that's an important part, especially in all of your day-to-day conversations. But this also leads nicely into our next kind of topic with Brian, is that what goes into making an out-of-home ad and designing it to fit. I mean, it does, out-of-home does so many different things so well, obviously very good for branding and whatnot, but give us some insight around, what do you consider, what do we need to look at, or what do marketers need to be thinking about if they're starting to really consider the channel in a full funnel perspective?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I mean, I think Jessica mentioned earlier, the rules of out of home sort of still apply. And honestly, I think this applies to all of advertising, keep it simple. But especially in out of home, especially if you're, talking about billboards, when you get, into spaces like transit ads and the screens in office buildings, you have a little bit more time with the audience. But I think the thing that's happening now with programmatic, I noticed it, first with, digital, just online programmatic, we have a similar opportunity, and it actually is making things much more complex for creative because of the opportunity to have multiple messages, where to our audience as to where they are in their customer journey or physically. So I think for creative, it actually makes it, if we're using it effectively, it makes it much more complex. So, we need the time to think it through, and from strategy's point of view, we need to map out the customer journeys. This is, along with someone like Julie. And so it becomes, it's not all in creative. It becomes much more of a team effort in terms of building something like this out. And then, you kind of come up with an idea that then you have to iterate on. And that's where it starts to take time. It's simple enough. And I'm like, I see us going towards a world that's sort of like, this is an older movie, but there's I think it was Tom Cruise Minority Report, where he's walking through this futuristic world and the ads are actually talking directly at him, which is obviously a little bit in the future, but with things like AI, I think a lot of this stuff will start to become more integrated into this tech and allow creative to think of the bigger idea, and then the AI possibly could start to build out these iterations of it. So it takes, some of the onus off of just that hands work that we have to do to build this stuff out. So that's part of it. I think the other part of it is, I wrote down 3 times context, and we've sort of touched on this before, but I think it gives us an opportunity. And, when I'm saying, and Julie mentioned this too, we're talking about where people are at that point, both in the customer journey and physically, and taking all those things into consideration to sort of build something out. And I think it's sometimes easier to do that with a one-off. So it really depends on the whole ecosystem. Like sometimes it's a campaign and you kind of do light touch at different parts of the customer journey, or you pick a spot that's really relevant to the audience and do something interesting with it. And so it's a lot of understanding, a lot of data that has come into it that sets creative up to do work that's really relevant and timely. Sure. That was a long spiel, but it's a lot. There's a lot of complication. Yeah.
Well, and I don't think there's a very, this is the exact answer to that, right? Obviously it's per client, it is quite different. And there's lots of things that are being considered when you're building creative out. Is it what colors to use? Is it a contrast? what's the messaging, and those all align to context. Julie, how does that translate, I guess, from the media side or in conversations with your brand marketers that you work with?
I think it's very similar to what Brian said, but I think even, at the forefront, like working with partners like Vistar, like Pattison, if we were just to email you and say, I need a CPM for an out-of-home buy, that's fine. You can give me that. But it's once we really start saying, okay, this is a client, this is a challenge, this is who we're trying to reach, why, when, the more details that we can layer on, the better that we can all kind of ideate together and really understand how to make this come to life. And then all those details go on to Brian. I think sometimes we get caught. I've seen, thousands of blocking charts that just have a line item that say programmatic out of home, but really, like, if you could highlight that and magnify everything that encompasses, but it starts at the very beginning of us really having a crystal clear understanding of talking to our clients and knowing what is that specific tactic trying to do in the plan, so that, to our earlier point, it's not getting all lumped in. It's not just, Brian and his team trying to create, something that's just going to work wherever, portrait, landscape, and, and it's for, our media partners to really help us understand what is the new tech, because it changes quite often. And so you're going to know a way of targeting people, of making this campaign sing a lot more than I might. And that's where I think it goes back to, the time, the ideation of asking the right questions of our clients, but also of our media partners. And then just really sharing that with, our creative partners as well, so that we're all kind of on the same train together.
And if I could add a tiny bit to that, sorry, Scott, I was just going to say, when it comes to tying it all together, there's the original messaging that we're talking about, the creative execution. And what I like about where the technology is going now, I come from an ad ops background, is we can actually do the executions with ease, going back to that efficiency level where you can say, I'd like to have this specific conquest moment, but I also want to have my brand message go out and have it contained within a singular platform that creates an overview of the entire buying process. And I think it ties in a nice circle as we all work together on these things.
And our clients love that, because as we know, measurement is a massive part of what we do. It is a lot more robust than what it ever used to be. The expectations that we're just going to run out of home and say, yep, you got 100 million impressions, check, are done. Like, more and more we need to understand, like, how are we pacing, what is the delivery, how is this flexing over time, and to use that to make the campaigns better and to go back with something more than just, like you said, Scott, like a check mark on a page to say, well, we spent your money, we ran some boards, job well done.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it's something, as we've seen kind of more adoption with technology in the space, are those advancements. So we think of measurement as an opportunity to build client retention, obviously through individual clients, but I think on a greater scale at showing the value of what out of home actually does deliver to a marketer. We also understand that out of home is a piece of the pie of the full marketing execution, but I think it's great to highlight that we're now able to add accountability to the investments that are coming through. And as we're all touching on these topics here, measurement's obviously one of them that enables us to kind of have that story of retention. And when we add those other pieces, like we think of, obviously this is a very engaged discussion about creative, but we can now actually, working with a lottery client, update a jackpot universally across multiple different partners at ease, right? And give that kind of opportunity to consolidate or have that story. So I think that's one thing. The key thing just before we jumped into measurement, I think, was collaboration though. And I think, we're kind of at a stage now where it seems like that's a continued point that needs to further be explored or kind of continue to do more of that, not only for the direct clients, but I guess for out of home also. Moving forward, I guess a little bit more, I think some of these, so we talked a little about the lottery clients. I think when we think of considerations of kind of moving with brands, and Julie and Jess, I think this would be great to pick your brains on, but we've kind of touched a little bit on like, hey, this is maybe some of the best practices that we should be thinking about when using creative in the out-of-home space. But what are some of the key considerations around education to clients on this? Is there something that really sticks out to helping them better understand the strategy? Is there, like Julie, like you mentioned, is it a measurement thing? Jess, is it an efficiency thing? Maybe we can dig into that a little bit more and uncover some more of your thoughts around those. I'll go to
go first. I'll take a
sorry,
crack
I'm looking at Jess, but I know you can't see. You can only see. So.
Yeah. Well, for me, staying on the topic, I think the one thing to remember is that it is still a separate medium. While we do cross over, out of home has its benefits in and of itself. Where dynamic content and working with triggers and working with your audience targets and moving with boards comes in handy is reinforcing that. So from a creative standpoint, still recognizing that it is in a space that we are, to use an old school term, somewhat of a passive medium, where, while people enjoy out of home, it's not something where they're truly locked in. So making sure to grab that message and making sure that it's contextual, but still managing the reach that is required to have that frequency to really work out of home to its paces. Don't know if I'm answering the question, but that's what I came up with.
Absolutely. Julie, with the clients directly, great to have your perspective on that as well.
I think mine kind of in the similar vein. I've been around long enough to remember when programmatic digital came out, and we somewhat put our foot in our mouth and we overpromised, and we talked that we were going to optimize every day and we were going to A and B test on and we held all these things up, and then we only started to realize that some of it just wasn't useful. I can't throw 2 different versions of creative into market every single day and truly know how they work. So I think we've learned from that. And with programmatic out of home, there's still the watch out that, exactly to your point, Jessica, of understanding, like, what is its role? What are we trying to do? If we want, our clients love testing, but let's be really cautious. Unless we've got a QR code or a specific offer on 2 different messages, it can be really easy to say, yes, let's A/B test, and yes, let's do all these things, and yes, let's optimize, without really having a clear idea of what does optimization look like. At the end of the day, it may still be reach. Maybe it is engagement, maybe it is signups, but I think we just have to be really cautious that we don't overpromise like we did in the early days of digital.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it's that, and I think you hit a great theme, is that education piece, right? Is we want to make sure that we're talking about the right core pillars that are addressing their marketing needs, and obviously where out of home fits into that. I guess just open it up for another question is, what are some of your favorite dynamic creative campaigns, or that you've actually seen, or maybe that you've worked on, that you'd like to share? Brian, anything from your end? Kick it off to Brian first.
Sure. I did. I mean, I was curious, and I remembered some, but I wanted to look and see if there were others. I'll start with one that I did a few years ago. It was more of a stunt, but it was a really interesting use of dynamic digital. We did something for Canadian Women's Foundation where it was for younger girls, and the whole idea was to get girls to say messages of empowerment to other girls across the country. And we kicked it off with this stunt where we were in downtown Toronto. We had a billboard. It was I'm blanking on the Dundas Square. We had a billboard out, we had one billboard up behind a digital billboard. We talked to girls, walking through Dundas Square, and we asked them to, say a message of empowerment to girls everywhere. And they would say the message, and then we were off to the side typing in the message, and it would appear on the billboard behind them, and we get them to turn around and see their message. So it was it went viral that we filmed it, but we used that medium in an interesting way. One that's really old now, but it's one of my favorites, was British Airways. They basically, it was just one board in a space where the planes were flying over London. I think it was in Piccadilly, and they had this kid it was a video of a kid on the screen, and when a plane would fly over, you could see it in the distance. The kid would run along and point at the plane and tell you where it was going, and it was to sort of promote the destinations, all the destinations that British Airways had, and so just really simple board, which is what we're talking about before. Keep it simple, stupid. But the technology behind it was super complex. Like they had like an antenna that would would detect the planes flying through the thing. They would detect their destination. It would do a bunch of things in the background, and then tell you where it was going. And the kid would be running along, pointing at the plane as it was flying across the sky, which like lined up somehow. I don't know how they did it. It was incredible. And then, so that's one of my favorites. There's a recent one that Burger King did, which is really cool as well. It was called Burger Heist. This was also in Europe, where it was based on Money Heist, which is a popular Netflix show in Europe. But they partnered with them, and the idea was that you could steal burgers off of the out-of-home boards, digital out-of-home boards. So you'd go up to it with your phone, and there was an NFC scan that was built into the board, but it would transfer the burger from the board onto your phone, and the burger on the board would disappear. So it had to have a connection data-wise to and people were running around looking for ads, which is insane, but it was all built into this dynamic way of using out-of-home. So those are a couple of my favorite examples. I don't know if anybody else has any that you've seen recently, but these are ones that caught my eye.
Well, I think that's a good segue. I'll throw it over to Jess and Julie, but it kind of, I guess, is a nice kind of segue to think about best practices. I mean, Brian, you've listed some great examples of being very creative. I would wish every one of our clients had maybe the opportunity to deploy some of those, but maybe we think on a more day-to-day basis, and kind of like, how do we build in more of those kind of impactful, or how do we create impactful digital out-of-home campaigns, maybe in a more kind of like day-to-day message to clients?
Yeah, I have an example, if I could, that I really like, and I was like, oh, it's not nearly as cool. And there's lots of them. Like there's shifting somebody's hair when they come into the subway. All of those things are super awesome. I'm always like the ad ops practical person, but when I think of a recent day-to-day campaign that really layers in some of these integrations, it was a tire company that wanted to promote their products with 3 tactics. One was a full brand campaign on out-of-home, digital out-of-home. The other was store targeting. So then it layered in that audience piece of catching people in the moment when they needed to do something about the situation they were in, buy tires, all of those things. And then the third was a weather trigger. So when the temperature sat between a very particular point, and this is where I think the communication part comes in, instead of just triggering when that tire issue could become a situation, we talked to them and tried to figure out what they were doing. And instead of just doing one, we layered all 3 in. And I think dynamic content is a great place for this, where trigger the content when the weather has changed. It's between 0 and -7. Run that content. It's still that simple, beautiful message, but it's applicable to the situation. When within range of a particular store and your customer's going to be there, you still have that same simple message, but it's directed towards the consumer itself. And then brand awareness as your backbone to the entire campaign, and layer the 3 together, and you have a really nice complete picture for the brand.
Yeah, great examples. All very relevant across the board from some of the core products. Julie.
I think even, I know we touched a little bit on lotteries, and lotteries is just such an amazing client for this type of tactic. So as Jessica had even mentioned, just the efficiency of having that live link so that we know the jackpot is always accurate. Important for Jessica, for Vistar, important for us, important for our client. But then also now layering on and saying, we know exactly when people are buying tickets. We know where they're buying tickets. So how do we make sure that message is showing up at those kind of key periods? And it's something that driving around, you might never necessarily realize you're being served an ad because of all those different triggers, but that certainly exists in the background. We've done the weather triggered, which is just always so fun. And then we did another one with the Montreal Grand Prix, where we had people, we had a professional photographer, we had people getting photos taken of themselves, and then pushing that across different out-of-home channels to really kind of highlight the fun that was going on at the Montreal Grand Prix at that moment, to obviously stimulate more excitement. And then we also had a contest going on that was available for people on the grounds and outside of the grounds as well. So there was a direct call to action. But one of the, I think sometimes, and that's where Brian and I are fortunate to be sitting next to each other, but even I think going back to that theme of collaboration, that sometimes I think we've all had that moment where a brief comes across your desk and you're not really sure. And that's where you just can't discount, having those like good conversations with your media partners, with your creative partners, like sharing it with them, finding out what else could be possible, and pushing the client a little bit more to give more information than maybe what we initially thought of. And sometimes those conversations just lead to creative ideas that I would have never thought possible, but from kind of the collective brain trust at the table, they start to come to life.
Great point. And again, touching on that collaboration theme and working closely with all your partners, I think is super important. If we kind of take that and we reapply it in maybe a different lens, and we think a little bit about like, what are the challenges that marketers are facing? So if we think we have great collaboration, there's obviously marketers are coming to work with all of us, and they're like, hey guys, we need to reach these audiences. But what do you think some of those top challenges that they're facing now that perhaps collaboratively we can continue to solve the problems for, or generate new ideas, referencing your the F1 example that you used, where it was a social play through out of home. We recently did one last year with the NBA that updated the live scores of the playoffs in real time. So what are some of the challenges that maybe marketers are facing that we're almost positive or hopeful that out of home could potentially solve? Julie, back in the hot seat.
Back in the hot seat. I think one of the challenges, we've touched upon measurement. I think we are still not as consistent with measurement, how we're talking about it, how we're reporting, how we're asking our partners to do it. So I think that's one thing. And I think even a little bit off the vein of measurement, of being really clear of what is the purpose of out of home, of programmatic out of home. Like Jessica, I loved your example because it could do all three. We just need to be really crystal clear, because I'm not afraid to admit that there's times where we think we're running an upper funnel campaign and you get to the bottom and the client says, well, how many engagements, how many conversions did you drive? And you just didn't know. So I think it goes back to that measurement of being really clear and of understanding are we expecting programmatic out of home to do everything or just fulfill one part of that?
Jess?
I think that's pretty much covers what I was going to say on that one. What I like about the programmatic out of home side is the ability to change midstream relatively easily. So if you are in that situation where you were top funnel, but you're working on driving down to the lower level, you can talk to your sales teams or your partners or whoever they might be to really connect and make those adjustments as you go on larger campaigns. What I think is there's so many specialists that we can work with, and there's multiple partners that we can work with. Sometimes I think that communication gets lost. And we can all do better to really drive home what the client expectation is. From my experience, some of the places trying to stay on the creative vein where I've seen challenges, and Brian, maybe you can jump in on this one as well, is when working cross-platform, that simplicity of out of home gets lost. And some of the harder conversations that I've had is this looks to be a print ad that is being converted over to out of home. How can we help clients really navigate out of home as its own medium and not just an extension of a digital message where it's really close to you, going back to those big shiny boards?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think because we have the opportunity with digital out of home to spread the message, different type messages for different places instead of having it all in one place, I think is really opportune. I think it was also the other thing I wanted to add is the we started to touch on it, but the nimbleness we can have, like, I think that's something that marketers are definitely looking for more of, because, you know, the way that how quickly things change, like opportunities might come up. Maybe it's a you know, we had a situation where there was a jackpot that was like the same for so many weeks, and people were just starting to ignore the ads because it looked like the same ad over and over again. So to break that up, it was easy to switch out the advertising, you know, and we sort of turned something around in a couple of days and broke up the monotony of the ad that people had kept seeing. So you can be more nimble, which I think is definitely something that you know, hasn't been traditionally an out-of-home thing you could do. You know, when we're printing everything, it would take, you know, a couple of weeks to switch out a board, or, you know, unless you're lotteries and you had a little piece that you could switch out, you knew early, you know, you knew that was part of it. But I think that's a really big part of it. And then relevance, as we've been you know, talking about. It's like, how do you be more relevant all the time to the consumer? And you know, as we go forward, it's going to become easier and easier. And so that's something that's I think clients are definitely looking for in terms of their advertising.
Jess, I mean, thank you, Brian. And Jess, you made a good point about, you know, clients reutilizing assets to come into out of home. Like, we've seen stuff where it's like, click here. It's like, well, sorry guys, don't want to break it to you, but so those conversations, Julie, and you know, we're kind of maybe leaning, ask you guys this question is like, how does that, what are you talking to clients about? Like, how are you creating that contextually relevance? I mean, we touched on all the flexibility points that out of home brings now, the data, the measurement pieces, those things are in place, but how are we helping educate those clients to maybe think of out of home as this impactful channel that now has these levers that you can pull, you know? That's hey, don't click here ads for out of home, right?
I think in some ways it goes back to, you know, we were talking that, you know, if I were just to, you know, fire a note over to Brian and say, hey, I need some out of home for this presentation, or maybe I'm not even telling him, maybe I'm saying I need programmatic. But if instead you're having those conversations and you're talking about where it's going to run, giving the creative team, you know, whether they're internal or external, but just having those conversations with them. And even, you know, we've started to move that when we're presenting a media recommendation, of having some of the thought starters of what creative could look like in it, so that it's not one of those pieces that at the end of the day, everyone's panicking and saying, well, let's just, throw in our print hat, or let's just, you know, throw this digital big box in there and call it a day. But it does become a point of conversation with every single channel that we're presenting on the plan.
Yeah, I think like it's always a tricky thing, like in the creative process. I think what we strive to do, like Julie was saying, is come up with ideas, but include media in that part of the process, because it's like some ideas work better in certain mediums, and then, you know, from Julie's perspective is like, I need this reach, I need to, you know, get to these people. How does the creative fit into this? And so it definitely has to be a collaborative process to get the best results, and you know, stops us hopefully from putting a click here button on an out of home ad, that type of thing. So no, it's an interesting way of working. I don't think it's traditional. I think what happened before was more of a waterfall effect, where the idea would be the thing, and then media would come in, and then, you know, everybody would freak out because it wouldn't work. And, you know, like, so we've been trying different things here, definitely to sort of mitigate that whole situation.
Got it. So if we start seeing click here advertising for out of home now, should we talk to you, Brian? Or
Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, if that goes through in my watch, I'd be very embarrassed. So definitely talk to me.
Oh, no problem. So those are some great themes that I think we all touched on, and I think I think creative is this kind of nice, continued, exciting process that we're going to continue to build on, in an iterative process. There's lots of different POVs. There's lots of different clients that utilize it differently, but definitely out of home continues, I think, to show that It's a very powerful medium and can be flexible. It can be personalized with messaging. And we have great partners that are able to kind of execute across all of these fronts. Before we wrap up and go to the Q&A, maybe I'll just pass it around if anyone wants to add any comments or maybe a quick closing remark from anybody. If not, we can go to the Q&A and have some questions if there are any from any of the audience. All right.
We said all we wanted to say.
Yeah.
Love it. So we'll pass it over back to the moderators. I'm not sure if there's any questions or we'll open it up, but we're all ears.
Yes, so we do have two questions in the Q&A. The first one says, the lines between programmatic online and programmatic digital out of home have been blurring more and more over the years. With that in mind, how have the processes and role or responsibilities changed over the years when it comes to planning or executing campaigns?
Sure. I guess we get both perspectives. Maybe we get Jess to chime in on that first as a media owner to kind of see how that's changed on her end. And then from more of a where the dollars are kind of planned and bought from, we can get Julie's perspective as well.
Sure, I can talk to the execution side, I think, a little bit better than the other. For me, what I find interesting as it blurs is to really take a look at what has worked on both sides of the equation. We have that systematic, consistent message that we can now do across both sides of the coin. But what does digital bring to the table and what does out of home bring to the table? Where I found some unique situations with out of home is really from an education standpoint, going back to that, really explaining what out of home is, what it does, where its strengths are, where its weaknesses are, and where we're different. So while you can create a plan that is cross-platform, both digital, connected TV, out of home, you can use a similar creative size, creative format, or even creative message across all. Each one of those mediums has its own unique perspective and its place in the execution side, and I would assume on the planning side as well.
Julie?
Yeah, we'd be similar. Like, I'm not going to say when, but way back when, I remember we were staffed as you had a team of digital people, and then you kind of had the more generalists. And that can't exist anymore, or at least not, not with the clients that we have, because you talk about programmatic online versus out of home, even video. Like when we talk about video, are we talking TV, connected TV, streaming? So I think that you almost need to approach them all still thinking about, okay, what is the value of each channel, of each tactic? What's going to help me reach my goals? Who am I targeting? What are my budget challenges? All these normal questions that you regularly would. And the way that we staff, and we're smaller than some of the massive, network agencies, is that we have a team of people who work on a client, who understand that client, and who need to understand the role of every media channel. It's the people, like if you're in media and you love it, chances are you kind of thrive on the fact that things are constantly changing, and you may have thought you knew the world a year ago and then all of a sudden you don't. But just like, the team that we have here of that, as programmatic out of home becomes a lot more, they can't just look at it the same way that they did online. They kind of have to think of it as almost a new category and kind of that intersection between out of home and online. And that practice would go from, from planning, from, working with the media partners, the creative partners, and also just through to execution of going back to, being really crystal clear of what is that goal that you are trying to reach, and not trying to make programmatic out of home something that it isn't.
Great points. And I think the core theme from both online to, I guess, programmatic out of home is you think of these topics like data and measurement. They're kind of, I don't want to say they're exact replicas of what happens, but those kind of concepts remain the same as well. So as we are seeing those teams, Julie, as you said, those teams kind of combining maybe, I guess some of the knowledge passed over is still remnant and can be applied in the same way. The next question is for Jessica and Julie, and they're asking about the different triggers and how many different triggers and creative assets would a brand and agency typically create for a campaign? And maybe Brian, you can jump in on that too.
I almost feel like, Jessica, you should, because so far, like the limits to the triggers is really just the limits of the data. And sometimes there's triggers that are available that we absolutely don't know. I don't know. It's an interesting question because I don't know in my head if I have a cap of like, I would do no more than X amount of triggers. But it does go back a little bit to what Brian was saying. I think if you make it overly complicated and you have so many triggers, at some point, you're maybe really exploiting how the channel could be used, but you could get to a point where you're not really sure at the end of the day how it performed and what you truly learned from it moving forward.
I wholeheartedly agree with that statement. I think it comes back to what you said, Julie, about what you're trying to achieve, what the goal of the campaign is, and how to use the medium to its best possible capacity. So I know it's not an actual answer, but I don't know a cap either. I really think it comes down to the function. You can layer in as many data types as you want. There's ways to, tap into a feed to the creative itself. You can use it within a platform like Vistar, where you're applying some of that targeting or triggering on its own. But at the same time, are you accomplishing what you look to achieve with it? Or are you missing the boat by trying to layer in, I'm going to put in a weather trigger, a data trigger, only run the ad when the stocks are at this. Once you start to, I'm not the creative expert, but I think it can, at that point, create a convoluted message with the creative itself within the out-of-home space.
Mm. Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think it really has to be relevant to the idea, the creative idea that you're bringing to it. And that could be more than one. I think generally, I don't want to limit it, but I think it should be just really like some triggers are obvious, like and obviously work into the creative. I think I saw one that was for a global warming charity, and it basically, every time it rained in the place, this ad would come up because it was talking about flooding. So weather trigger, flooding, like it's all connected. But there could be stuff in the background that's happening that is a certain time of day. We know that this audience is in front of the board. It doesn't really connect to the idea per se, I guess, but it's sort of like it's something that we know our audience is going to be looking at, this placement. So you could have a couple, some maybe more creatively obvious than others, and then others are just more functional, I guess.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah, I like the idea of one or two as a guideline, but then layer your tactics. Maybe assign a line item to one versus the other. A very simple example, which I think we all know of, but it's effective. Run the type of food product that I'm going to be eating at that time of day, but then have a secondary tactic for a particular target or stunt or trigger that goes along with that particular point. And then you're getting the best of both worlds. So keeping it simple so we're not disrupting the creative message, the most important thing, but layering them together as separate line items to create a full picture might be a good way to go.
Yeah, excellent points. And I think you touched, Jess, and Brian, everyone, you touched on the flexibility of it. Brian, your point, context, it's king. Be where your audience is, talk to them how they're looking to be engaged with. So some excellent point there. And again, another highlight of how we can create triggers, or you can have dynamic creative to speak to those audiences in meaningful ways, as you are looking to engage them throughout their journey or their path. So great points, everyone. There's no more questions. If anyone does any others, feel free to send them through now. Otherwise, I'd just like to thank everyone here. Jessica, Julie, Brian, thank you so much for your time today. Really enjoyed our discussion and having this engaging chat around creative and putting it at the forefront for digital out of home. And we're looking forward to not having click here out of home ads, but more exciting continual iterations of dynamic creative and being contextually relevant and working collaboratively across all of our partners. So thank you guys so much for your time today, and obviously to the IAB and to everyone here listening. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions after this, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was
super
fun.
Yes, I'd like to thank you all as well. It was a great discussion, lots to think about. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. We hope you enjoyed the session and continue to attend our next webinar, which is next Thursday, May 25th at 1 o'clock, where Skidbid will present building an AI-powered media buying strategy for brands. Lastly, if you haven't already registered, we have our marquee event at the end of this month on May 31st. The State of the Nation, IAB Canada's annual industry summit, right here in Toronto at the Great Hall. That's it for today. Thank you, everyone. Have a great remainder of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.